Thank you so much for that very kind introduction and for setting the scene. If I may just take a moment to introduce our audience to the background of our wonderful guest speaker who's come to visit us here in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE, especially here at the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. Many of you will be familiar with her reputation, but I'm going to take this moment, just reel off the titles of her books. She's a prolific writer, a columnist, known as a respected opinion maker in India and across the world as well. Best known selling author of Socialite Evenings, Starry Nights, Speed Post, Second Thoughts, Strange Obsession, Sultry Days, Bollywood Nights, Surviving Men, Superstar India, and the list just goes on. Shobha ji, thank you so much for joining us here on the stage. I'm intimidated by your wonderful bio and also just really awe-inspired. You've been writing for 50 years, I believe without a break, which probably means this is why you have a prolific write-up of over 20 books.
Thank you so much.
Ooh. We'll just make sure that you are switched on, otherwise the audience will only be listening to me. There we go.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone in Abu Dhabi, and namaste from India. It's a great, great pleasure for me to be here. It's my first time at the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair, and what I see around me, the incredible energy and buzz and booksellers and young writers and young readers gives me enormous hope for the future of books and for the future of young minds. So when you say I've been writing for 50 long years, it doesn't really seem that long, but it is indeed that long. So 20 odd books and 4 columns a week. I blog, I tweet, and I write, and I write, and I write, and I really wouldn't want to do anything else, because for a writer, there is no bigger high than being, for example, at a book fair like this, at a Lit Fest, where you get the energy from people who are not just your readers, but who are readers and who respect the printed word. And we are here to share ideas. We are here to share our lives, our thoughts, our emotions. And that is really what motivates writers across the world and has motivated writers across the world for centuries. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for inviting me.
And thank you for coming to the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair for the very first time and supporting the Literature Festival here. Now, Shobha, I know that you have visited the UAE many times over the years. Tell us about your experience visiting this country. What's it like being here in person?
I've been visiting the region for over 40 years, and of course in those 40 years there's been dramatic change. And I like what I see. I like change, and I like progress, and I like the idea that today both our regions, coming from India and being in the UAE, are coming so much closer together, and there are less misconceptions, there's less ignorance, and a much healthier kind of investment in cultural ties and in trade, and overall the perception is that this is the region that's going to be dominating a lot of activities intellectually and culturally, politically and economically. So it feels good to be here, very good to be here, and I'm very optimistic about our future ties.
And of course, you and I, we have a common heritage. So myself being a London girl, a former BBC journalist, moved to the UAE and in particular Abu Dhabi many years ago. Now having the privilege of working with such a wealth of international, but especially Emirati talent, I know that you get to meet people who are at the head of these organizations, who are ensuring that the local talent is being celebrated here. I know that you are supporting a writers program and coaching young writers themselves. And also you're working with the international community, which is represented here. As an Indian here, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to represent all of India, but the literature, the history of the Indian literature, it's so rich, it's so vast. Just now, we've had the announcement about the International Booker Prize being awarded for the first time to an Indian in a translated book. What would you like people to take away when it comes to, you mentioned the misconceptions about this place, but the misconceptions about India. What would you like to correct on the misconceptions about Indian and Indian literature?
Well, if I were to be completely candid and honest, which I know no other way, when I used to come here back in the, well, 30, 40 years ago, the misconception about India was it was mainly the, I don't mean to put anyone down, but it was a labor community. There were people on construction sites, and most of it was, the association with Indians was either you're a nurse or you're a construction worker. And I'm very proud of the nursing community that is working here and of the construction site workers here. But there was much more to India than just extremely poor people driven out of their own country to seek more money in this region. And a lot of people were not aware of this other India. And this was before social media made it as accessible. The whole world is your oyster today. We can know immediately what all of us are doing, and it's a much more connected world. And I'm very happy about that. And I used to be fascinated to come here because, for example, Dubai was like something out of science fiction in those days. It was like an unending fantasy, an ever-evolving destination. Then you came back even 6 weeks later and the skyline would be completely different. It was fascinating to see how aggressively the progress was so visible. It was visible in the construction, in the architecture, and I used to come to Sharjah, of course, for the cricket. So they're old connections, old ties, which I still deeply value. Lots of friends in the region. I value their friendships and hope to make many new friends on this trip in particular. I've been fortunate to meet some really wonderful people and connect in a way that's not just a lit fest connection. It's much more than that.
And I appreciate you answering the questions which are much more wide than your books, because the beauty of these types of literature festivals is that we get to know the authors beyond the work as well. So I appreciate you giving us an insight into the personality that you are. And on that note, I am going to recommend 70 and To Hell With It. If you haven't dabbled with Shobha's work, this is a good starting point because it gives you a flavor of the lady behind the prolific list of books that we mentioned there, but also more recently, Lockdown Liaisons. On the point of lockdown, we spoke about this off stage. The virtual world, it was important, it played a key role, but we are so happy to be here in person, aren't we?
Lockdown Liaisons was written out of a sense of panic. We were in the middle of something cataclysmic, unprecedented. A microbe had brought the world to its knees. And most of us, the whole world in fact, didn't know at that point what to make of this calamity. And we didn't know whether we'd wake up the next morning or the nature of the microbe, how it's going to affect us. And affect us it did. I mean, the implications were many and very profound, and we're still not completely, we're not out of it. And I'm almost certain that in whichever way the pandemic affected us all and made us question our priorities, question our relationships, question what's important to us. And as a chronicler of our times, I could not let this moment in contemporary history pass without writing about it in my own fashion. And it was very cathartic for me as a writer. And I started to write these short stories. And I was fortunate to find a publisher in Simon & Schuster. I proposed to them that we don't wait for the pandemic to be over and with the writer looking back, because it was so immediate and so emotionally powerful for me. It had to be recorded and published while we were still in the throes of dealing with it emotionally and physically. And they were open to it, so I wrote 4 short stories a week, which were published as e-stories. and then an e-book at the end of 26 stories, and then finally the printed version, all of it conceived, written during the lockdown. And that's why the lockdown liaisons, because it's really about a whole range of interrelationships that most of us started to re-examine in our own ways because of what we were experiencing. And I'm very happy to say that it's 4 of those stories are now being performed across the world as a theater performance. And they've just finished sellout shows in Singapore, and I hope it comes to this region as well. And because they're very easy to connect to, because we've all gone through something dreadful, and the stories are not dreadful at all, but they're very truthful in terms of what the characters are saying. They're all written in first person and as monologues, so it's easy to understand the emotions behind the characters who are sharing their lockdown experiences.
And there's so many interesting threads that you've introduced there. We could pull on many of them, but one particular one I want to just emphasize the point on. Your writing is beautifully accessible, fun, entertaining, but you do grapple with some of the harder issues in life, and you do it in a way with this beautiful dark humor and this wit and observation that you have. Something we mentioned off stage, we're talking about the lockdown, we're talking about the global experience that many people have, experienced at different levels. Mental health is really important to you in your writing. This book, written pre-pandemic, there's a beautiful quote in which you encourage readers. You say, seeking help is step number 1. Gradually, we are moving towards a more rational approach when it comes to mental health. So many families are admitting they cannot cope when it comes to dealing with some of the big issues that you deal with in all your books: domestic violence, sexual abuse, and also depression, withdrawal, bipolar conditions, anxiety, chronic fatigue. And you go on to say that this is a positive development, the first big step in the right direction. So I know we can talk about some of the more entertaining elements you write about, but just to emphasize that point, some really hard issues that you grapple with.
There can be, for a writer, you can take you can take many approaches, but for me, it has always been to make a strong point without being a preacher. At the end of the day, you can do it via storytelling in your own fashion, or I do it in any case through my columns, and I do it through the non-fiction books that I write, but it's never a preachy tone, because I believe that alienates people. So when I'm talking about mental health, it's something that I believe the world is just about waking up to its impact. Perhaps the pandemic made us stop and think about how far-reaching that impact is. And in many ways, big and small, we all dealt with anxiety and panic attacks and feelings of a kind of a dread that our own mortality. And we started losing people we love. And it just showed most of us the fragility of human existence, and that we can't take anything for granted. And honestly, every second, every breath that you take is a second chance at life, and how precious that life is. So mental health is something that has been tabled with some uncertainty and a lot of self-consciousness, especially in traditional societies. It's a taboo subject. There's still so many stigmas attached to people, which prevents families and people who need help to go seek it. And I feel very strongly about this because, as I often say, if you have a toothache, surely you're going to see a dentist and get the toothache attended to. So why shouldn't you go to see a specialist if you're dealing with something that emotionally you're unable to cope with? So it's something I advocate in India and on all the platforms that I'm privileged to be on.
Thank you so much for expanding on that point, because I believe that there's a real power that lies with people of your stature speaking about this openly in India, coming and visiting regions like this, that cross-collaboration is really important. So thank you, Shobha, for speaking about that and for tackling some of those really gritty topics in your books. The fragility you mentioned there, of humankind, you navigate those particular issues through your characters, through speaking quite candidly about your own personal experience really well. I wanted to ask, when it comes to your life and bearing all, so to speak, advice to aspiring writers, what's the balancing act? There's a beautiful chapter in here where you talk about the danger of social media. You talk about the danger of the private and public space that we hold within ourselves. What would you advise to someone who's thinking, how do I know how much to share? When will there be a backlash with what I share?
A writer needs courage. It's as simple as that. You need self-belief. You need confidence. You need to be able to tell yourself not to be afraid. You need to put yourself out there. You need to feel you can be naked with your emotions, with what you wish to express. If you don't feel strongly enough, then maybe writing is not for you, and or a very cautious approach to writing may be what suits you better. But at the end of the day, the call as to how much to share is a very subjective, a very personal call. So when I did write a memoir when I turned 50, it was deliberately called Selective Memory, because I chose what I wished to share, what I was comfortable sharing, and it wasn't a bear-all, tell-all, sensationalistic sharing for voyeurs. It was something I wished to share on a much deeper level, so that readers and people reading it, there had to be a takeaway for everybody. Shared experiences shouldn't be for cheap thrills. It should have some depth when you're sharing something you've been through, which has meant a lot. It's transformed you in so many ways, and you cannot trivialize it, and you cannot sensationalize it. And that sense of responsibility comes with experience, but eventually that call, how much to share, is the writer's call alone. And like I said earlier, you need that self-belief, and you need guts to go out there and put yourself out there, put yourself on the line, and take what comes with it. Because very often you get a lot of flack, you get a lot of criticism, and a rejection. And if you feel that you're thin-skinned enough to react to it each time someone doesn't approve of what you're saying, then it's tough, because it's not worth a book or a column affecting your mental, emotional stability. And if it's something you cannot stomach, criticism comes with the territory. It's a part and parcel of putting your work in the public domain as a writer. Then it's better to do a rethink and maybe do something else.
I really appreciate you, really sharing that insight. And the words that really struck me there was courage. Don't over-sensationalize the stories and the information that you have in life. But when it comes to your particular, because you are a role model to so many people across India, internationally, especially young women who look at your formidable feminism and how you've led quite a rebellious life. Who would you say is your role model? Who do you look up to? Who inspired you as a writer when you were young?
I read the classics. I was very fortunate that my bureaucratic father didn't buy expensive toys for his children. He invested in books. So books became my friends at a very early age. But I can't single out any one writer. It went from, the great Russian writers to much later, it was Germaine Greer and all the ladies who were breaking the molds and rewriting rules. Not necessarily as a militant feminist, which I don't identify with, but certainly thinking about myself as a woman in the world and seeing it through their work and taking a great deal of inspiration from what they were saying, not necessarily agreeing with all of it, but certainly being inspired by some of their thinking processes, which did provide perspectives which, for in a traditional society like India, were at the time in the 60s and 70s, very revolutionary ideas to subscribe to.
And when it comes to your writing, both when you write from an autobiographical point of view in your columns, but also your fiction writing, women are really placed at the center of the narrative, but a nuanced representation. You've talked in this book about how the relationship between the mother and daughter hasn't been investigated and actually written about enough. You often say the mother-son relationship is the one that's kind of celebrated and talked about. And in your books, in particular the bestsellers Socialite Evenings and Starry Night, you have these really complex female characters, nuanced, dark at times, obviously always devastatingly beautiful, like yourself. And so how did it feel like for you? Because you created that space. You're one of the very early Indian writers to create that nuanced perspective of the female. And I'm not going to judge Bollywood, but there's a reputation that Bollywood presented a one-dimensional view of the female. How was that for you when you initially started writing in that way?
Well, I felt honestly very privileged growing up because I grew up in a family. My parents were progressive. They were not liberal, but they were progressive. They weren't conservative enough to keep us within, strict boundaries. We were made aware of our responsibilities, but no one tried to cut our wings. So I took a lot of my freedoms for granted, but I could see around me that the lives of women were extraordinarily tough, very challenging, and women, even today, are treated like second-class citizens. We are the world's big minority that the world doesn't often acknowledge as a minority, because then too many tough decisions have to be taken to address that inequality. So I did speak up. I continue to speak up for the underdog, because a lot of women don't have a platform. They have no way to express what they're going through. And the secret subterranean lives of women interest me a lot, because there is so much guilt associated without it ever being expressed. And that guilt is unwarranted 95% of the time. They are self-flagellating because society expects them to conform to certain prescribed roles. And even within family, their voices are not heard. If they're heard, they are not respected. So they live with feelings of anxiety, self-doubt, almost their entire lives. And if I am in a position, a small position, whichever manner, I can give voice to some of their angst, their frustrations, their resentments, and give them courage and hope that it's really not terrible to own your feelings, to own your identity, and you don't have to feel guilty and apologetic constantly, keep apologizing to the world about being born a woman. On the other hand, celebrate it and see the difference, because if you start thinking of yourself positively, you communicate that positivity to the family, to the community at large, outside of yourself, and the response that you get is generally positive, unless there's someone really out to keep you down and get you. But even those feelings of victimhood, I don't ever recommend to any woman fighting against inequality to play the victim card. She has to be a warrior and fight right back, and only then will she be able to assert herself.
And I think that links beautifully to your dedication at the beginning of this particular book, where you dedicate it to the female gladiators out there, that you're very much encouraging and celebrating womanhood in all its guises. You mentioned in a previous comment the cathartic nature of writing. I believe there's a cathartic experience that the reader has from reading your books as well. So there's this beautiful synergy, and my gratitude to you for actually being brave enough and being courageous enough to tackle these issues for some of us who still are looking for this type of writing and still looking for this representation. You have this long relationship with a place like the UAE, where it is a beacon in the Middle East. Female talent, is being celebrated, is being promoted. Many of us here in the audience and organizing members of this particular book fair will know of really strong Emirati talent here, female Emirati talent. And for you visiting here, it must be very encouraging to see that. And in your time in India, witnessing the Indian female kind of really seize the role, seize the opportunity. I just want you to maybe expand on that point and link into, you write about this relationship that you have with India. You call yourself a child of the Republic. You know, you give away your age, very similar to the age of India's independence as well. Just give us an insight in terms of charting that progress that you've seen in India when it comes to women. We talked about the challenges, but the progress as well.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people in media focus just on the negatives and the worst stories out of India, especially when it comes to the representation of women or how women are treated, without going into all of that, because those realities do exist. I'm not trying to sweep them under the carpet and say, oh, all is hunky-dory and glorious. Of course it isn't. But there's no country, no society which doesn't have its share of inequalities, whether it's towards men or women. So for me, the positive story is the fact that educating the girl child is a top priority, not just for the government, but I see it in my daily life. Like in India, we are privileged enough to have people who work in our homes. And in the past, maybe in 20 years ago, the ladies who work for us, who cook for us, who help us raise our children, would have spent their salaries on maybe buying a television set for their own homes. Today, that same salary is determinedly and with focus spent on their daughters, on the young girls, to make sure that they go to school. This is a huge shift. They do without what would be called for them luxuries. They do without sometimes even an extra indulgence, but they make sure their fees are paid on time, the girls go to school on time, the girls get their books on time, the girls are neatly dressed, and they take a lot of pride in talking about the progress the girls are making at school, and their hopes and their dreams are limitless. And I have seen the girls of the help at home go on to succeed in various fields, and there's nothing to stop them now. You know, they have tasted something wonderful, which is education and the opportunities that education brings with it. And to me, that's a big positive that India is building on, because at the end of the day, the female resource in any society, in any country, is really indicative of how progressive or regressive that society is, or that nation is.
And I think this idea that you do talk as well about the importance of celebrating both genders, but also the class insight that you provide. I do recommend you to pick up a copy of 70 and To Hell With It. If you fumble all the way through, there's this wonderful montage of photographs of Shobha with, it's like a who's who of India. It's like extraordinary. Hoping one day there might be a photo here from the Abu Dhabi Book Fair as well. But no, you know so many people at the top of the tree. And your books, in particular, Starry Night, Socialite Evening, really expose that. You talked about the class, the privilege of having people that you work with, who work for you as well, but also the privilege of an insight of a world like this. Does it mean that when you make friends and you're lifelong friends, people are often saying, Shobhaji, are you going to be writing about what you're seeing here at this particular party?
But that happened in the early books a lot, less and less now. And it was almost as if they were fishing or hinting that they would love to be featured in the next book, of course, camouflaged in some manner, but they'd know who they are. So I even had a girlfriend, who's still my girlfriend, a very close girlfriend over 50 years, who would boast at Mumbai and Delhi parties, oh, Shobha can't write any book without me featuring as one of the characters in her book. And I found that naive and sweet and lovely. And I never did disillusion her, so that was fine.
Well, if she
And
watches
she
this
just said,
interview, she might be
yeah.
shocked that she's
Well,
not represented. Are your characters completely a figment of your imagination, therefore, completely conjured up by yourself? I am going to open it up to the audience in just a moment. I'm generously going to share Shobhaji with you all. But just another question. When we talk about this idea of, you mentioned your female friendship there as well, relationships, they really are central. We talked about the mother-daughter relationship point earlier. Especially in when you write autobiographically, you really kind of explore this idea of how, you know, relationships change, this letting go, this the fact that over many years you've seen friendships which ebb and flow.
I think a big lesson of the pandemic for most of us was to cut the flab from our lives and to curate our lives with more responsibility and more consciousness, and to eliminate relationships which were often dragging us down or had a negative impact on us without our even knowing it. And I certainly did that. I know my husband did that too. And we actually learned to live with ourselves and to like ourselves much more than we did. We weren't looking for external validation in quite the same way as we did before the pandemic. So just getting to know our own selves better, and therefore being in a position to say, so and so, so and so, so and so, so and so, nothing wonderful has come out of over the years from this particular relationship or friendship or association out. So I've been very ruthless in terms of there's just so much time there is in the world, and am I going to waste it on people who actually actively annoy me? No chance, not anymore, at all.
And I think ruthlessness and a rebellious streak definitely comes out in a lot of your writing. Another like gem advice that you have in your book is this notion of becoming more comfortable in saying no. And I think, again, this is where Shobha's work is so wonderful. It reads as a kind of a how-to guide. You're not prescriptive, but you give your gems of insight and wealth of experience. And again, I am going to open it up for the audience to ask some more questions about those gems of experience. But that lesson of saying no, it was a hard lesson.
I think for all of us to arrive at that point where you feel confident enough to walk away, and that gives you the actual power when you can turn around and someone coming up with a deal that you know from within instinctively is not for you. Maybe when I was much younger, maybe in my 30s, I would have hesitated because I'd have felt I was offending the other person, and I would have gone along, and I have, with a lot of things which were really dumb decisions at the time. Today, I really feel empowered enough to walk away from practically anybody and anything that makes me uncomfortable. And it doesn't matter who and what that person and what that proposition could be. And that sense of empowerment, well, it took a long time getting here, but now that I am here, no, it slips off my tongue very easily.
And you write about this idea of confronting your fears, seizing the no. It's a very liberating process for you. And I think this notion that you said that it was empowering for you, but again, I would reiterate that your writing is empowering for the reader. You almost give us the permission to put the book down and say, we will be the female gladiators and male gladiators. We're being inclusive here. So no, thank you for the empowering work. May I ask the audience if you have questions? Because I know off stage we did. We're going to make sure we get a mic to you, just to make sure, yes, our wonderful colleagues, please do give the mic to the gentleman in the blue t-shirt. And anybody else who's interested, please do indicate. Maybe we just need to make sure it's switched on.
Welcome to Abu Dhabi, Shobha. So, Shobha, I am 44 and I have been consuming your, your novels, your columns, and your shows. I remember when Swabhiman was on air, it was a part of, after I came back from school. So, it is like that, we have consumed a lot of, your opinions, your writings, everything for a long period of time. And I think that holds true for, all middle class Indians. You know, being a big presence in you know, in Bollywood, in the form of your columns, as a commentator, your columns in Times of India and Outlook, and your blog, unfortunately, is not working anymore. So one word that I would associate with you is being candid. You know, you don't hold on to your punches, you know, and it is very refreshing, especially in today's times when, you know, playing safe is the smartest way of all. You know, India has had people who have rose to very high positions, even prime ministers, because, you know, they kept their opinion to themselves. But I'm sure, you know, as a businessman husband, as a mother, you know, you have had to pay some price, you know. So do you, but you know, so have you ever, like, you ever try to place a balance, and you sometimes feel that you have paid a price for being honest and frank? Thank you.
Well, to answer you candidly, since that's the word you've used, there's always a price tag when you stick your neck out, always a price tag. You have to figure for yourself whether it's worth paying or not. And I would say that I have never ever regretted the price I've had to pay for my opinion. And I've been very blessed and truly thankful and full of gratitude. Like you said, my husband is a businessman. It could have put him into a spot, and it has many times. My children have been threatened sometimes, and it's not always comfortable being my family. But they have steadfastly stood by me, and for that, it's a debt I really owe them, because it's one thing to hold on to your own opinions, but I would never ever want to do it at the expense of someone else. I wouldn't ever want to jeopardize someone else. So it is a walk that you, it's a tightrope walk. It's like an acrobat who's constantly wondering that so many balls up in the air, and you just hope and pray that they don't collapse one day, and you know. But so far, God's been great. God's been kind, and my family has been absolutely splendid and wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, and clearly a super fan. So thank you so much for coming and asking that wonderful question, and for answering so candidly as well. Any more questions from the audience here? Well, we have Isabel, the wonderful festival organizer. Isabel, over to you.
Hello, and wonderful to hear you speak about your journey and about the you don't make enough of your courage, actually, Shobha, because you could not do what you do without a huge amount of courage. So kudos to you. My question is, in your books, how much does the landscape of your childhood and the food of your childhood feature in your books? Does it creep in? Please tell us.
Wonderful question.
I cannot believe you just asked me this. You know why? It's almost, I don't know what to call it. It's spooking me.
Oh.
It's spooking
Has
me because
Isabel picked
that's
up on something?
exactly the book I'm working on right now to mark my 75th, which is next year. And it's a subject I haven't even discussed with my husband or my family. Only my literary agent knows, and one editor who likes the book very much. But it's the first time that I've dealt with both those and just those two aspects of my life. They're not incidental to the book, they are the book. So my God, I feel like, yeah, you read something somehow intuitively.
I think Isabel has a sixth sense because she's been doing this for so long.
It's just that the landscape of India, the food of India. If I ever go there, I am like in a movie. It is so powerful. It's so strong. So I was just thinking about how much, and particularly from your childhood, because those are when the memories are implanted. So I can't wait to read it, Shobha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's given me so much courage because I wasn't sure whether I was on the right track. But this was the book I wanted to write. At 75, I didn't want to go into yet another book about, I did write 70 with a certain determination and purpose, which was to free women from the cage of age, that they shouldn't at all feel that they're marginalized and they mean nothing because they have reached a certain age. They should own that and feel good about being that age. So this new book, I wasn't sure because it doesn't have gems. It's not about received wisdom. It's really about deeply felt emotions, and those cannot be divorced from your childhood and what formed you and what has made you who you are. And food is very much a part of it because food is what nurtured you as a child, and food is what you remember in a way that is so sensual, and it's what your mother cooked for you, and so it goes back to memory of a very deep and beautiful and sentimental kind, and that's the book I want to write, and I'm halfway through it, so thank you.
Wow, so that's an exclusive here at the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair, an insight into Shobha's new book. And it does mean that that relationship really is cemented here, that Shobha will be coming back, I'm sure, to give us more insights and exclusive snippets.
I would love to.
And I think you absolutely nail it in the head there in terms of food. It's an expression of love as well in cultures where love may be not expressed in the kind of romanticized Western way. It's, as you mentioned, the mother role there as well. Often the food to ensure that the belly is full, even if the words of like emotional intelligence can't be delivered. So that's really important. We've got a moment more for another question from the audience. If you do want to, yes, let's make sure that we have the young lady ask her question there. Thank you. Please you introduce yourself and ask the question, Shobha.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Dana, and I remember...
Sorry to keep the mic really close.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
All right. I remember when I came first and you were talking about women and feminism and everything, it inspired me to ask you a question. Why do sometimes women have to be shamed about being private or open about their life or any problems they're having? Personally, with me, when I either complain to a friend, and I wouldn't say complain, but, you know, talk about my problems, sometimes I either get the, oh, you're just telling me for attention because you're a woman, or you're, you know, if I'm being too private, you know, you're hiding something or something like that. So what advice could you give me about that?
Excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's the kind of stereotyping that I think all of us have dealt with at different points in our lives. And I think just pick your friends better. If they don't get you, they can't really be your friends. Or you need someone with empathy who you can just be yourself with. Every human being wants that. Even men want that. You don't want to be judged. You don't want to be constantly told that it's an inappropriate emotion for a woman to be tabling. Because there's nothing like an inappropriate emotion. Emotion is what you feel. And each emotion has its own validity. So next time, just, yeah. She wants
Sorry,
to...
you want to ask another question? Yes, I think we've got a moment to ask one more question. Because you're showing courage, so we want to encourage that. And I think these are wonderfully insightful. You can, yes, the mic. Yeah, you can. And this will be our last question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, I wanted to also add on to that. The stereotype that women always have to apologize for something. That like, oh, like right now when I just took the mic, I felt the need to apologize for it. For some reason, that is kind of a stereotype with women. So what's your opinion on that? Like,
that's
just
a good
apologize.
observation. That's a good, and
Yeah.
thank you for your questions. I appreciate it. So the idea of apologizing when we do be courageous, what would you say to that, Shobha? Would you?
You know, that cliche about love means never having to say you're sorry. Well, I think it's good to live with a mantra like that. Be true to yourself, and you don't really have to keep apologizing, A, for being a woman, or for having a mind of your own, or having an identity of your own. Just own being a woman and be proud of it, and hold your head up high, always, and keep walking.
And these are the beautiful gems of advice that you have in your fiction and in your factual writing. Shobha, I'm just going to ask you to end on just one point. We are sitting here in the wonderfully inspiring Abu Dhabi International Book Fair, surrounded by some of the greatest literature here in the Middle East, in Arabic, in English, lots of international collaboration that you represent, and the wealth of talent here as well. Your books, over 20, translated in over 20 languages. Arabic. Have you got a book translated in Arabic, and would you like one to be?
I'm looking around for a publisher, Arabic publisher. If you're there, I'm sitting right here, ready to do the deal tonight. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
And on that note, to find the publisher, please do approach her because she's just a wonderful media personality. We're going to say a big, big thank you to Shobha Ji for coming to Abu Dhabi, for gracing our stage. And I want to say a big thank you to the Arabic Language Centre. I know that they picked you especially to be here. They've organised the book fair. I want to thank the whole team that's organised today, the organisers, the AV team, the volunteers. Of course, I want to thank our wonderful audience that have taken the trouble post-pandemic to be with us and give us that energy that we're really feeding off. And to thank Shobha Ji as well. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.